What I want to look at today is the evidence that tends to indicate that the Australian Taxation Office is privately owned. So I'm going to examine a letter sent to Doug Cameron from the Australian Taxation Office in response to a Freedom of Information Act request that he made back in 1999. There's two bits of information he requested from them. One was the definition of income, which we're not going to deal with in this video, and the other was certification of the documents that establish the Australian Taxation Office, and that's what we are going to focus on. So this is page 1 of the letter to Doug Cameron. I've just put it up so that you can pause the video and examine it at your leisure if you wish to. I'm going to start reading from the top of the third paragraph on this page and go over to the second page and just read the first paragraph of that page, because that's the part I want to focus on. So I'll just put that up, and I'll now put up page 2 just for a few moments, just so you can pause that and look at it. That should be enough. Now I'll put up an extract of the paragraphs that I wish to dig into, and we're just going to read these, and then we're going to go and analyse some of the deceptive wording and deliberate misdirection that the Australian Taxation Office is attempting here, in my opinion. This is the reply from the Tax Office to Doug Cameron. With regards to the creation of the Australian Taxation Office, I was able to ascertain that the ATO was created as a branch of the Commonwealth Public Service by an executive instrument in 1973. An extensive search of the ATO Library and Records Management System failed to identify any document relevant to this part of your request. Similarly, inquiries to the Commissioner's Office, People and Structure Branch, the Delegations and Authorisations Officer and the Parliamentary Business Unit did not identify any document. On the advice of the Australian Government Solicitor's Office, I contacted the Office of the Official Secretary to the Governor-General in an attempt to identify and obtain a copy of the executive instrument. This office referred me to the Federal Executive Council, who then suggested I contact the Australian Archives. A detailed search by all officers failed to locate the relevant document. Accordingly, I am obliged in terms of Section 24A of the Act to deny access to this part of your application on the grounds that I was not able to locate the requested document. Well, quite clearly, they can't find the requested document. And as you might have noted, that is an extensive search. They've gone everywhere looking for this document, they can't locate it. Now, the deception that I would like to suggest is that they're trying to have you believe that they've lost the executive instrument. I assure you this is not the case. I just want to point out that this involved the Australian Government Solicitor's Office, which is the Solicitor General, second highest law officer in the land under the Attorney General. It also involved the Office of the Official Secretary to the Governor-General. The Governor-General is the head of state, the Queen's representative in Australia. This is an important executive instrument. And what I want to point out is that once they conducted this search and failed to find the document on government records, they did nothing. Now, I've dealt with a number of, establishing a number of trust deeds in my time, over the last 30 odd years. And first thing I'll tell you is when you set up a trust deed for someone, there's 3 copies as a minimum, and they sign all copies. You send them off for stamping at the Stamp Duty's office, and they come back stamped. 1 is stamped original and 2 are stamped copy. So you have 2 certified copies in case you do lose the original. Okay. You also have minutes of meeting to record the establishment of the deed. So when you have an executive instrument, there should be minutes of the meeting where you established the executive instrument and a minimum of 3 copies, and that's for mum and dad sort of arrangements. This is a federal government. I would think they should have to have a dozen, but at least 3. So if they lost them, they lost everything. They've lost the minutes of the meeting and they've lost all copies of the executive instrument. What I'm going to suggest to you is that there's a very good reason they can't find these documents, and it's got nothing to do with them being lost. They can't find these documents, I want to suggest, because, well, where can't they find them? They can't find them in government files and records. Doesn't mean they're lost, it just means they're not in government files and records. Why? I want to suggest because they're in private hands, because the Australian Taxation Office is a privately owned entity. And referring back to the many trust deeds I was a facilitator in establishing, those trust deeds, once they came back stamped from the Stamp Duty's office, were held by the private parties who set them up. They weren't held on government files and records. The government would have no files and records of those trust deeds. The state governments might have a record that they stamped a trust deed in the name of so-and-so, but they don't have a copy of it. They don't keep a copy of the deed. And they're not stored on government records because they're private. They're private documents, and the private parties hold them. And I want to suggest that's what's happened with the Australian Taxation Office. The private parties are holding the executive instrument that established the ATO, not the government. That's why they can't find them. Also, I just want to quickly relay another experience I had with a trust deed. After 60 years, an elderly gentleman had lost all the trust deeds, and he needed one. What he was able to do was take all the copies of financial statements that he had for the trust, all the minutes of meeting he had for the trust, and from those he was able to take those documents to court and reconstitute the missing deed, because from those documents they were able to establish the original trust corpus and the parties to the trust, being the trustee and the beneficiaries. That could all be established from the minutes of meetings and from the financial statements, which, if they truly had lost these documents, these men of government could have done. And they're all lawyers, all highly qualified lawyers too, Queen's counsels and that sort of thing. These are people who should know what to do in the event that documents are missing. Moreover, these are people who should know the importance of these documents and ensure they never go missing. And I believe they have ensured they never go missing. They just can't provide them to you under a Freedom of Information Act request because they're not government documents. They're private documents. I think that's pretty strong evidence myself. But I think there's a bit more in this, and it's in the first paragraph. Another deliberate attempt, in my opinion, to misdirect Doug Cameron, the recipient of the letter, and anyone else who reads it. First paragraph. He says, I was able to ascertain that the ATO was created as a branch of the Commonwealth Public Service by an executive instrument in 1973. 1973, he's left himself a fairly broad period of time there, hasn't he? They should know the exact day, but they don't give you that, they just say 1973. I think that's critical, because I think they're trying to misdirect you here. I just want to give you an example which might make this easier to explain, because you've got to really read that carefully to get where the deception is. Let's say I wrote a cheque today and signed it, did everything to execute the cheque, and I handed it to you. The cheque's been executed today. However, you've got, under the law, you've got up to 12 months to bank that cheque before it is termed a stale cheque and can no longer be banked. You could bank the cheque 11 months from today and it's still going to be good. I was able to ascertain that the ATO was created as a branch of the Commonwealth Public Service. Well, that doesn't mean that's when it was created. That means when it was created as a branch of the Commonwealth Public Service. What I want to suggest is that's the date the cheque was banked. 1973 is when they banked the cheque, or created it as a branch of the Commonwealth Public Service. But that's not the day the executive instrument was executed. And I want to suggest that there's a very good reason why they don't want you to know when it was executed. And why they're trying to imply that, I think that's a deliberate misdirection to have you believe it was executed in 1973, when in fact, going to the cheque example, the cheque wasn't drawn in 1973, it was drawn, I'm going to suggest, in December 1972, but it was banked in 1973, and they're telling you when the cheque was banked, not when it was drawn. Okay? Why do I say that? Well, there's a bizarre period in Australian politics referred to as the duumvirate. On the 2nd of December 1972, so 3 to 4 weeks before 1973 starts, there was a federal election, and the Liberal Party, which was the then government, conceded defeat to Gough Whitlam and the Labor Party. Now, normally, the Liberal Party would stay on as caretaker government until all the votes had been counted. Okay? But in a bizarre turn of events, Gough Whitlam went with his deputy, Lance Barnard, to the Governor General and said, swear me in as Prime Minister today. Even though I can't form government because the votes aren't counted, but the Liberal Party had conceded, and he said, well, I'm stepping in. And they conceded in favour of Whitlam, so he said, I'm going to take the reins today. even though I don't have any members of Parliament because they can't be sworn in until the votes are finished being counted, which will take a couple of weeks, at least. Okay, so the Governor-General swore him in as Prime Minister, and he swore in Lance Barnard as his deputy. And then from the 5th of December till the 19th of December, these two men made 40 key decisions of government without anyone else being in the Parliament. No other members of Parliament were present. No one else was present at these decisions, perhaps with the exception of a representative of the Governor-General. But these two men made all these decisions. And I want to suggest to you that one of the decisions they made was establishing the Australian Taxation Office. And if you look into the period of the duumvirate, there's no government documentation for that period, no government documentation for the decisions that were made. And I believe this is the period in which the Australian Taxation Office was established by executive instrument. And that's why they want to put some separation between December 1972 and the formation of the Australian Taxation Office, which is why they try and misdirect you into believing that the ATO was established in 1973, when in fact it wasn't. It was only the part of the ATO that was being established as a branch of the Commonwealth Public Service was done in 1973. The banking of the cheque, if you like. The writing of the cheque, or the executing of the executive instrument, I believe, was done in December 1972, during the period of the duumvirate. And I think those are the key pieces of information that indicate that the Australian Taxation Office is a private entity. And I believe that's the piece of information that you can metaphorically hit them over the head with. Don't take this and run with it though. Plenty of people have had this information and handled it the wrong way. It's not just about knowing what's going on, you've got to know what to do with that information.